name is Julie Ann Link, and welcome to the Music Link. This week on the Let's Link project, I'd like to welcome second bassoonist of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra, Ben Yingst. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you.
For everyone watching, Ben and I did our undergraduate degrees together about 15 years ago at Arizona State University. Ben, please share an overview of who you are and what you do as a professional musician.
Well, as you mentioned, I play second bassoon in the Tucson Symphony. I've been doing that. That's been my main job for the last 8 years or so. And before that, I was mostly taking auditions to try to win a job. I've played chamber music. I've occasionally taught a stray bassoon student here or there. Don't have a whole lot of teaching experience, but mostly I've just been a musician, and that's, just mostly focused on bassoon. I played a number of instruments when I was younger, but just orchestra bassoon and chamber music is mostly what I do with my life.
Ben, where are you from, and do you ever visit?
So I grew up in the Phoenix area. My family moved to a couple of places around a little bit until I was five or six, I think five. So basically, Phoenix area was my home. They still live in the same house that I grew up in all those years. And I usually get up there once or twice a year. With the pandemic, I haven't been up there since March. My parents are in still relatively good health. My dad's had a couple of things where he's a little bit at risk, but they're both doing great. My mom is in amazing shape. She exercises all the time, and she's sometimes she's almost fanatical about doing this in the morning, doing this in the afternoon, this in the evening, whatever. So yeah, I get up there every now and again, when there's not a pandemic going on and there's not a risk of spreading something that they don't want to get.
Ben, do you have an exercise routine or anything that is similar to your mom's?
Well, I usually go for a walk like almost every day, and living in Tucson, the weather's always good, even when it gets a little hot in the summertime. The summertime I have to really put that towards either the very end of the day or the very beginning of the day. But I usually go walking, biking, hiking when it's not hot. And then I've been bowling since I was a little kid. I've been bowling on leagues, and you could debate whether that's exercise, but I think the way I throw, I turn it into exercise.
Yeah.
I like to take all my anger out at the bowling alley, so
how did you first get introduced to music?
Well, I have a twin brother. Did you know that?
No.
Okay, well, I actually have an identical twin brother, and we both started taking piano lessons when we were in, I think, the second grade. And my dad is a musician, kind of on the side. He had an engineering job, for most of the time, until he retired a few years ago. But he does a number of music stuff. He's a songwriter. He writes country music.
Wow.
Plays a number of instruments. So getting into music was kind of, natural for my brother and I.
Did you always know then that you wanted to go into music and that was your path?
I think that only became clear by the time I got to high school. I remember when I think it was after my senior year of high school, I went to Interlochen Arts Camp, and playing in the orchestras there. I know if I hadn't decided by then that I wanted to play in an orchestra for a living, I definitely did at that point. But as a kid, I think it was just something that I did and that I was good at. When we were old enough to join band in elementary school, my brother and I were always, among the top in our, little tiny pond of a elementary school and middle school and high school bands. But yeah, I think sometime in high school.
Hmm. Tell me about what the music program at ASU was like for you.
Um, I don't know if there's anything like distinctive that I could say. I mean, I felt like I got a lot of, support for wanting to be an orchestra musician. It seemed like at ASU, sometimes the environment was always to push you more towards contemporary music, more towards chamber, more towards like, kind of being your own entrepreneur in music. And while I definitely have a lot of respect for that path, I felt like there were some areas, some faculty members in the school that were a little less supportive of orchestra music. Although, my teacher, Jeff Lyman, I felt like he was always supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And a lot of people were supportive of, wanting to take a more traditional orchestra path, which is certainly what I've done. I make no bones about that. But, I don't know what else I would say beyond I felt supported, and like I could, pursue my orchestra path, the orchestra career path. So it was, I don't know if you want me to address my grad school afterwards at University of Southern California. Felt like in some ways they pushed me a little harder along that path, given that that's what I wanted to do. Not to say that like it was a more intensely competitive school, because I felt like they were both very high quality, both extremely good teachers, faculty. There was something about USC that felt a little bit more like, oh, if you want to be an orchestra, we'll do that for you. Not that USC was lacking for the more contemporary stuff either. Just a slight shade of difference.
During your ASU studies and at USC, did you ever think about changing careers out of, that orchestral path?
Short answer, no. I never really did. There was always the anxiety of, will I be able to get good enough to win an audition? But at no point in my studies did I feel like I had exhausted my ability to improve myself, to keep working at it. There was a point later, before I got my Tucson Symphony job, where I started to question myself. I'd taken a few auditions and it just wasn't getting any good response. And in fact, I think the last one was the one that I saw you at. I think that was at Toledo. Was that Toledo?
I think so, Ben. It's been so long.
You know which one I'm talking about, though.
Yes.
And after like that one was when I decided that I needed to get a different bassoon. Whether that was the problem or not, that was what I decided I needed to do. And so that was the one moment for a few months, maybe along like a year or so, where I started to wonder if this was going to work out. But during my school, no. And I never wanted to do anything else. Never anything else that I thought, oh, I could see myself doing that. I mean, there are a number of things where you're like, oh, I guess that could be an enjoyable job, and nothing that I wanted to like make for my career.
Thank you for sharing that. Tell me about each of your music teachers and how they have influenced you.
Well, to start, so I've had really, I guess, 3, or maybe we could say 2.5 main teachers. One of them was I took a handful of lessons with, but first was Jeffrey Lyman at Arizona State University. And I think the biggest thing I learned from him was just to have a personality and not be afraid of anything. I felt like, I know sometimes it seemed like there were some people that didn't get along, that some students that had a hard time working with him, and others who worked pretty well. And I always felt like I got along with him. And I always felt like, um, you know, whatever he demanded of me, I could, I could do it. I could, figure out what he was asking. So, um, yeah, it's hard to pick a like musical details that he taught me versus what, my other teachers taught me.
Mm.
But when I went to USC and studied with Judy Farmer,
Mm.
who's still there as far as I understand, she'd done a lot of her training in Europe, so I got a little bit of I guess, a European influence. There's definitely a few months transition where studying with her felt like a completely different experience from Jeff Lyman. Also different personalities, although not like, I mean, no, not like that, not like worlds apart. But it was definitely a different experience, and Judy taught me some things musically that like, oh, I hadn't thought of, phrasing things this way. So that was really a good experience to find. And then my last teacher was Bonnie Wolfgang of the Phoenix Symphony, recently retired. And I only ever took maybe like 10 or 12 lessons with her altogether. Just enough that like I got kind of a rough overview of what she had to offer. But it was really nice getting those lessons with someone who had, I mean, granted, she won an audition, was it how many years ago? I don't want to say how many years ago.
Yeah, I don't know how long Bonnie was there.
But she was in the orchestra world. And so, having someone in town, in the Phoenix area that I could study with who had that particular experience, and, not that Jeff Lyman and Judy Farmer weren't very good teachers, because they were. And Judy, I know she does a good amount of freelancing in the LA area. She sometimes plays with the LA Phil, and a lot of film music. But it was nice with Bonnie to like, to get that experience of, and to be like, I want your job. How do I get your job? I mean, not your job particularly, although that opened up a couple of years ago. And I took my best shot at it. And of course, auditions, don't always work out. Very happy for the guy who won it. I know him, Doug Brown, I think that's his name.
Yes.
I know him from Interlochen, so that was a little consolation for me to be like, okay, well, if I didn't win it, I'm glad to see, not that there weren't a lot of other good, worthy candidates, not to put anyone else down, but to see someone that I know get it it always makes you feel good when you're trying to, it's so hard to win auditions, and when you see your friends winning one, it's like, you could take it two ways. You could take it as, oh, now you could take it with anxiety, like, I thought we were at the same level, and now but you could also take it as, all right, if someone roughly at my level in various ways is winning an audition, then maybe mine's just around the corner. So.
Ben, could you share more about your teaching career?
Teaching. So I've done just a little smidge of teaching. I've had a handful of private students. The first private student I had was, I think, brand new to the bassoon. I think she had played, it was an elementary school student. She had played flute. So she knew nothing about reeds, and I knew nothing about teaching bassoon on that level, because I had been playing bassoon for at least 10, 15 years by that point. And so many of the things that I had to teach her were so automatized in me that I didn't know how to bring them back out to the surface. I was like, well, you just put the reed in and you blow. But of course, there's more to it than that. And so that was probably my most interesting teaching experience, was my first student, just because I almost had to relearn bassoon in a way, not for myself, but to, I remember at one point I mentioned my dad's a musician. And one of the instruments he plays is saxophone. So in some ways, this was a little bit cheating. I said, hey, Dad, can you try to play the bassoon and let me see if I can get you to get it right? Because I'm at a loss here for what to do. And it wasn't, she was a perfectly good student too. It was just, I had no idea how to teach beginning the bassoon. So that, of all my teaching experience, such as I have, that was kind of the most eye-opening, was like to learn when you get to a certain skill level, how much is automatized to a point where you couldn't verbalize it.
Yeah.
You couldn't put it into words. You just know how it feels. So.
Ben, I had a similar experience at CIM where we were doing a eurythmics class, and I was to introduce the bassoon to 4 or 5-year-olds, and all this very technical work had been done behind the scenes. And then how do I just simplify it and just make it fun, where it's bedpost sounds, or maybe 2 blades of grass together, or duck sounds, or it was a really humbling experience to just figure out how to make something that's so big in your life fun for small children. So I love hearing about that realization.
The very concept of taking something that you know very well and trying to teach a total beginner it's not for everyone to do too. I felt like my wife, Jessica Campbell, she plays bassoon as well, and contrabassoon, and she's also a music teacher, she's a school teacher, and she currently teaches primarily K through 4, just basic music, but she's learned a lot of that, how to take these concepts that we know and we take for granted and we've built so much upon, and take just the bare bones concept, boil it down to a way that little kids can understand. So
Ben, what have you learned about the music industry since graduating?
That's a loaded question. That is very difficult. That's the thing I would say. I feel it's very difficult to get into and to stay into. And if my playing ability, such as it is, was lower than it is, I think I would have a really hard time. I have never, I don't know if there's an art to making a freelance career work, to making connections, networking. I know there are people who it seems to me like are very good at that. I feel like I've been very poor at that. So I've always felt like, gee, if I don't win an audition, if I don't get in that way, I don't know how I'm gonna, I might get some gigs here and there, but I don't know how to piece together a whole career. I know there are ways to do it. I wouldn't be the best one to talk about how.
Thank you. Tell me about your chamber music and orchestra career.
Okay. I guess we'll start with the orchestra side. I've played in orchestras. I played in a youth orchestra when I was growing up in high school. And there's just been, obviously there are orchestras at the universities. But the playing in an orchestra has been my almost exclusive focus. Not just playing music, but specifically playing in an orchestra. And even when I got the job with the Tucson Symphony, I've kept taking auditions since then. Tucson Symphony is definitely not the highest paying orchestra out there. It's not bad. It's definitely, I could have it a lot worse than what I have. Pandemic aside, but that applies to all of us. But I would definitely love to move around as far as that goes. Or I remember when the Phoenix Symphony principal bassoon job opened up, there was an audition for that a couple of years ago. Being my hometown orchestra, I really, I put everything I had into that. again, as I mentioned, auditions, well, and I'd had an audition that I took a couple months before that. It was for, can't remember what position, maybe assistant principal of Grand Rapids. And as far as pay goes, I mean, usually I compare auditions by pay because, unless I'm not an expert at how one orchestra sounds versus another, especially all the little ones and the medium ones. And so as far as pay goes, the Grand Rapids job was actually pretty comparable to the Phoenix job. And in Grand Rapids audition, I had gotten to the semifinals. I'd gotten votes in the semis, not enough to make the finals, but I got some really, really nice feedback. I can't remember who it was who sent me a really nice email saying, I really liked what you did. I would have been happy to have you in the section. So I went into the Phoenix audition being all excited, and turns out there was when I was in Grand Rapids, this was in April, there was a snowstorm in April while I was there. So I was like, you know what? I'm sad that I didn't win the audition, but not that sad. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is where you wanted the question to go. Please steer me where if you're like, I'd like to cover this aspect of it.
It's great.
Yeah,
the evolution.
I've still been focused on taking auditions, and it's been a little depressing to not have any auditions out there for who knows how long right now. Who knows how long that's going to be, but it is.
Could you talk more about your chamber music playing in your chamber music group?
Yeah. Well, I'm also, so for the last few years, I've been in the Tucson Symphony Orchestra Woodwind Quintet as well. Wind Quintet, I guess they like to be really, I know Woodwind Quintet. It's called both sometimes. And so it's always fun to switch back over to chamber music, just because as a second bassoonist, I don't always have the most important part. And sometimes, it feels like, hey, I'm here too. But, in chamber music, it's like everything is. And so it's always nice to play the quintet recitals. A lot of what we do are school shows. And sometimes those are shorter snippets of music. We play for like we play the same show 30 different times at 30 different schools over the course of the year. So that's not always the most musically satisfying thing, although it is a lot of fun to see the kids and, as we mentioned before, and boil things down to terms that they can understand. But before that, I mean, I had played in the Mill Avenue Chamber Players, which is a group in the Phoenix area. They kind of, I guess they're primarily a wind quintet, but they kind of have some mutating instrumentation. And I played in a couple other quintets whose names escape me at the moment. But yeah, chamber music has always been kind of it's been there too, for sure.
Could you share some or any memorable auditions or competitions that come to mind?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the auditions we kind of covered. I haven't done much in the way of competitions really. I've occasionally, there's been a concerto competition here or there that I've never won, but they're kind of interesting. So yeah, competitions I haven't done a whole lot of. Most of my competitions are auditions. So it was interesting because I consider myself a fairly competitive person, as I mentioned the bowling thing earlier, which I don't know if we'll talk more about. We can let the viewers decide that or whatever. But when I get up, in a bowling league, when if it's late in the game and we're really close, then I start to, this is fun. I really zero in. So I have a competitive streak about me. Whether that helps in my auditions or not, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that, or just like being on, for that moment, and bringing in the points, or the score that you need.
And anyone who follows sports, can kind of probably understand this mentality of, I feel like the whole sports mentality helps in an audition. Although maybe it wouldn't help. I feel like it helps me anyway. I won't speak for anyone else.
Do you have a favorite concert that you could chat about and share?
Concert that I've been to or played in?
I was thinking played in.
Okay. I would say any concert that I've played principal in and had a really important part. Those are the ones that always stand out for me. I mean, you know, when I play second bassoon, you know, on some random Beethoven symphony, or I guess maybe I shouldn't say, because random and Beethoven don't seem to go together at all. But you know, when I'm playing second and I've got my fill in, you know, my blending lines, and you know, the lines that, you know, my colleagues might notice if they weren't done right, but the audience will just hear woodwindy sounds in general. You know, I enjoy those concerts, but there's a sense in which those kinds of concerts, it's like, well, that's Tuesday for me. Well, I guess Sunday and Saturday and Friday, but you know what I mean. You know, that's kind of the run of the mill concerts that I do. So when I get the chance to, you know, I played principal on Beethoven 4, which is, and I did, and I got to play that with the Phoenix Symphony a few years ago, and that was very nerve-wracking. I mean, the first, I remember the first like half of the first rehearsal, the first like 10 minutes of the first performance. I mean, I could just feel my heartbeat going like boom, boom, boom. You know, and Beethoven 4 has a pretty nerve-wracking first bassoon line right at the beginning, where he's trying to, that adagio section or whatever it is, and all of a sudden the bassoon comes in. It's some, I don't know if I'm butchering the pitch over Zoom, but you know, it's to say nothing of the really fast solo in the last movement. So getting to play that with the Phoenix Symphony, and I also got to play that somewhere else, can't remember where.
In Monterey.
Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, in the orchestra in Monterey, Mexico, and then with Ashley Haney, and then, you know, getting to play first on Carmina Burana a few years ago in the Tucson Symphony, and something else, some other big part that I got to play principal on. I can't remember what, but you know, Carmina Burana, that really high solo. It could be worse, but it's you gotta make sure you gotta make sure the equipment's right for that one. So yeah, but those kinds of experiences are always the ones that like pop out for me as like this. I feel like those competitive juices, I feel like I get to use that side, you know. So I know, like, for auditions, I definitely get a little more excited when it's an audition for a principal position.
I like that you use the term excited. My next question is about coping with music performance anxiety. Do you have any techniques that you could share?
Techniques. This might go to things that I've simply automatized, but we'll see what comes to mind. I know, so a writer that I follow has talked about, like, when he has speaking engagements, and he's putting forth, and he advocates ideas that a lot of people disagree with. And I won't get into what those are, because that's not the point of this conversation. But what's really interesting is how he deals with nervousness, because, you know, he's got the high potential to get the audience against him if he doesn't say things right. One of the first things he says about nervousness is that, you know, it's perfectly good to be nervous, that, you know, this is a natural reaction to any time, what is it he says, that there's a situation where the outcome is not guaranteed, then meaning it could go well or it could go badly. And what is it he said? Something like that you have to do something about it. I can't know, I'm totally butchering the other thing he said. with it you want the outcome to go well, or something like that. Where you have a stake in it, it matters to you, and it's not guaranteed. And that nervousness is not something to shy away from, but to embrace. I mean, obviously, if you're trembling so badly that you can't even physically do what you need to do, you know, that's obviously a problem. And I know there are and for performance anxiety drugs for that. Some people recommend eating a banana, whatever. I know there are techniques for that. I wouldn't be the one to tell you exactly what they are. I personally don't really use much. And I'm, you know, obviously thankful that I can manage that. But learning to embrace that instead of saying, why am I so nervous? What? You know, because you spend all that time practicing and you feel good in your practice sessions, and then you get to the day and all of a sudden you feel different. And it's like learning not to feel nervous about feeling nervous, you know, recognizing that, yes, you're going to feel different. You know, if there are any symptoms of that get in the way, deal with them. I know for me, like my hands will get very cold. Whenever I feel like I'm on the spot, my hands are cold right now because we're doing an interview. So, you know, so, you know, and so I have to deal with that. But, you know, aside from the physical symptoms, just realize that nervousness is a good thing, because it means that you're on alert. You know, obviously you want to be relaxed in a certain way, but I think embracing the fact that you're going to be nervous is a good step towards being able to relax within that nervousness.
Who is the writer, Ben, that you know, talks about these experiences? Would you want to share who that is?
I don't know if I want to share his name right now. I think I respect his work, but I don't know if I want to throw his name out.
Nice. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. But I do appreciate you asking very much. So
yeah, I love the perspective of just starting with awareness and just knowing where it's coming from, and then just thoughtfully working through it. It's beautiful advice. Have you ever experienced?
It's a good thing. Nervousness. Good thing. Yeah.
Would you be able to share about any music-related injuries?
Not much, thankfully. You know, obviously with the bassoon, our hands and wrists really can take a beating with how much with the weight of the instrument, with how much, you know, how much our fingers are doing all kinds of crazy and or repetitive things. But I haven't had too many problems. I have occasionally I'll get a little bit of soreness in my left wrist. Just nothing, you know, nothing that keeps me from playing, nothing serious. And I have like a little soft wrist wrap, you know, just a cloth. It's the cloth thing that goes around, has Velcro on it, that kind of helps stabilize my wrist just a little bit when I have those rare episodes of soreness. But I don't really have that much in terms of musical injuries. I've been pretty lucky as far as that goes. Actually, the worst thing that happened to me was 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was the year after I won the Tucson Symphony job. My gallbladder of all things started bothering me, and I eventually had to have it taken out. But that really, like, just the pain in the abdominal area really kept me from playing until I got that taken care of. And then post surgery, I feel like doctors are wizards with the things that they can do. I had my surgery date. This was again 7 years ago. My surgery date was on August 19th. The first rehearsal for the Tucson Symphony that year was October 1st. And I did not miss a single service at all. For the first couple months, every week, at some point during the week in rehearsal, I'd feel a little twinge in my gut because it was still healing. but nothing, just enough to say, okay, these fortissimo passages that where the whole orchestra is playing, I'm just going to back off for now. Nothing, but that was probably my most serious musical injury, and it wasn't music related or caused. It just affected bassoon playing. But yeah, I'm happy to say I don't have a lot to say in response to that question.
Ben, do you wear a brace when you bowl? And do you find that bowling has strengthened your wrists for your playing?
So first question, you're talking like a wrist guard.
Yeah.
So I had never worn a wrist guard until a friend of mine that I met over the summer, who bowls, she uses a wrist guard, this friend of mine, and she introduced it to me, and I gave it a try, and it was really weird, and I didn't like it, and I was like, I want to get one of those. Because I wanted to see what it might do. And so over the next few months, I used it more for technique and improving my bowling technique, which I think it did a little bit. And then at some point I decided to stop using it. But I feel like I'm still using what it taught me as far as that. So that's interesting from a bowling perspective. We're not so much here to talk about bowling. So that's the long answer to yes, I have used a wrist guard, but not very much in bowling, and not before a year ago. As far as strengthening my wrist, I had been bowling since like the first grade. So all those muscles that bowling uses, they were strengthened as a kid, and and I've never had a problem with my right hand at all. My right hand. I've never had a problem with my right hand as far as bassoon goes. And except for occasionally, on the bassoon, how the bottom hand, sometimes it stretches, and if you're doing a lot of like high B flats and A's and C's where you're trying to, do weird finger combinations up in the high register, sometimes that can kind of, you got to shake it out. So, I mean, I've gotten sometimes just a little tired in my hand, but never outright in my right hand. So I've sometimes wondered what it would be like if I were left-handed and had been strengthening my left hand for all those years. If then I wouldn't need the wrist guard, because all those muscles would be strengthened, and bassoon would be just a piece of cake as far as that goes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Fun fact, my identical twin brother is left-handed, whereas I'm right-handed, and he bowled for about as long as I did. I don't think he's bowling right now, but he bowled for most of elementary school, middle school, high school. Although he didn't play a woodwind instrument, the trumpet, so I couldn't tell you. So it would have been interesting to go back in time and change that one little fact, but I don't know. As far as strengthening, I'd like to think that it has made a difference, but I couldn't tell you because I don't know what it,
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Tell me about your reed making style and techniques.
So my reed making style, short answer to this is I like to keep it as simple as possible and do as little work as possible. So obviously this will be technical information that our bassoon viewers will get, or any other reed players, anyone else. Sorry. So obviously I use gouge-shaped profile cane. I don't use a profiler, I don't use a gouger, I don't use shaper. I let other people do all that work. Obviously that's kind of the most expensive way to buy it, but I feel like I get good results. I feel like the key is finding not only the right brand of cane, whether we're talking Van Doren or Gonzalez or Midier or whatever else out there, but especially finding the right person, the right seller, processor. Sometimes if you buy GSP cane from some places, like every piece looks a little different, and I stay away from that completely. I have a couple of cane providers that every piece I get from them looks identical, and I guess, would you like me to advertise my sources?
Yes,
So,
that'd be great. Yeah, it'd be great to know
my
where
first,
people buy things.
what's that?
It's great to know just where people prefer to buy things and, you know, what
Absolutely.
they rely on.
So I've been buying cane from Bob Williams of Womble Williams. That's, I think Womble Williams is the name of his company, his double reed shop. Bob Williams, as many people will know, is the recently retired principal bassoonist of the Detroit Symphony. He's, I believe he's still operating his reed business, his cane business. So I really like the GSP cane that I get from him. Mostly I get Gonzalez from him and some Van Doren. Tried a few others, and I definitely notice a difference from one brand of cane to the next, even though he processes them all the same. So it's kind of interesting how picky you really have to be when you want to get to the highest level. And then my other source that I discovered fairly recently, within the last couple of years, I think, is Barton Cane. I think he's based in somewhere near Denver, somewhere in Colorado. And he has, I'm sure some people watching will know, he has a ton of different profile shapes or profile shapes. So they're probably a few hundred different options when you factor in that you can get some of these shapes in XYZ brand of cane. And it took me several tries to find one that really worked. But I found that he has styles that are based on some bassoonists out there. And I found that Glotan cane in the Kiesiger style from Jeff Kiesiger, that's been working the best for me. I've also been getting some Donzi in, I can't remember what. If he's watching, if I don't know his actual name, I think David is his name. If he's watching, he could probably tell you if he. Oh, yeah,
exactly.
What the order was, but Donzi in some style, I can't remember what. But yeah, it's been really interesting. And it's so interesting to get Gonzalez cane from Bob Williams, the way he does it, and then to get Gonzalez cane from Barton in one style, and those are totally different. And then Barton in another style, and Barton in another style are totally different. So it's amazing how different every little change. I wouldn't have thought that it would make so much of a difference. But so that's the big thing is, knowing what kind of cane I'm getting. If someone were to buy me cane as a gift and they were to just buy me any old cane, whatever, some random brand from some random place, I'd be like, I probably can't use this.
Ben, I love hearing about your individual preference for reeds. I think it's so fascinating how we all play the same instrument, but in so many ways our reeds are another instrument on their own, and how every person just has a very particular method and style and product that they like to use. So thank you for sharing that.
Right. Well, and it's that actually leads to a brief tangent. If I'm not quite related to reeds, but it's interesting how along that line every bassoonist sounds so different. And it's not just the bassoon they play on, but also the reeds they play on. And to that end, I should tell briefly about the first and so far only time that I've been on an audition committee. I got to be on the committee for a recent Tucson Symphony audition, and it was for second flute. And we talk about all these factors that make every player sound so different. And here I was, my first audition committee experience, and it was flute. Now that's not to say that that's not to say that every flutist sounds the same, but I felt like the range of difference was much smaller. So it was mentally, it was a real challenge to pick out. I don't know. I mean, if my first audition committee experience had been, oboes or something, where I could have heard all those differences, maybe I'd say, well, it's an audition committee and it's an audition, and there are challenges to all auditions. But I felt like flute in some way was very challenging.
Yeah, really interesting.
Cues. in some ways. Not to say that there weren't differences in tone quality, but they were much more subtle than I'm used to hearing.
Yes.
So,
Mm.
brief
Yeah.
tangent to the individuality reed bassoon subject.
Yes, thank you. What are some skills that you've learned in music that apply to other professions that you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, really any one of them could apply to a number of different things. I mean, to stick to something that's not a profession of mine, but we talked about with bowling. So I feel like there's a lot of similarity between playing in an audition and playing a game of bowling, to the extent that you know, you're in league, you're in competition, and oh, this game counts for something. There's very much you have to, you know, in an audition more than other places, you know, with both auditions and with being up there on a bowling lane, you're doing this by yourself. You know, I mean, bowling, we sometimes do leagues in teams, but it's not a team sport in that sense, in the way that like baseball or basketball are, where there's real cooperation, you know.
Right.
And there's a certain sense in which you really have to quiet your mind. You have to think about what you're doing, what you're about to do, but you have to think of it in the simplest terms. You know, if you're taking an audition, you can't be giving yourself like 20 different standing orders. You know, I'll play it this way, but no, you got to go in there. You got to have it down, and you've got to give yourself like one order. You know, start this note not too loud. It could be as simple as that. You know, and with bowling, and I'm sure anyone else viewing this who does any kind of sport or athletic competition will be able to understand this very easily. And that, you know, with bowling, it's the same thing, that you can't, you know, I can't be saying, okay, I have to line up for here and shoot for this arrow, and I've got to keep my arm like this, and when I throw, I got to keep this, and I've got to keep my head like this, my shoulders, all that. My brain is just going to shut down. You know, like I got to go up there and so just push the ball forward so it doesn't hurt. The rest will follow, you know, and it has to. And if it doesn't, then of course you've got to practice and improve. But you can't be giving yourself too many commands in that sense. You got to give yourself like one, maybe two simple things to remember. So auditions, you know, auditions in general, and certainly playing in an orchestra, playing in any performance situation, that also applies. But auditions is where it really, you know, becomes obvious. That every little thing you do, like the committee hears, but also you hear it too. So, as far as other professions, I feel like this leads straight into a question that you wanted to ask me at some point, which is about the project that I started working on not too long ago. So, obviously, with the pandemic, not a lot of music opportunities, and you know, I have not found the motivation to do as much bassoon practicing as I normally would in other circumstances, as I had been doing like before I won a job. Certainly when the pandemic started, I thought, oh, theoretically, I should be able to just bump up to that much playing every day. And, you know, I'd get through like half of it and I'd be like, I'm pretty much done. What am I doing more for? You know, I'm just doing more of the same thing, and who knows when I'm going to get to use this. So at some point recently, so one of the things that I've been doing over the past several years was learning to read better in Spanish and German. I had a number of years ago, I had like a basic understanding. I think I took Spanish in high school, and German I got to take a few lessons at some point a little later. But then at some point I decided to start brushing up and improving in those languages. And I got to the point where I could start reading books in those languages. You know, I started with like the Harry Potter translations. So I read something where I already knew what happened. And I go, sometimes in those books, I'd be like, oh, I know what this sentence is supposed to be saying. Now let me figure out how it's saying it, you know? So it was kind of like training wheels in that sense. But then a couple of years ago, I got to the point where I started reading books originally in Spanish and German, and you know, just the same kind of books I read in English. I mean, I'm not trying to read Don Quixote or anything like that. maybe someday, decades from now, when I'm much, much smarter, hopefully, but not now. Just kind of the Harry Potter or a little bit more advanced equivalent in Spanish and German. And a couple months ago, I was reading a book and I thought my wife would really enjoy the story. Now, she doesn't read in Spanish. So I thought, well, let me see if there's an English version out. And I think this book's only a couple of years old anyway. So I wasn't that surprised when I couldn't find one. But when I couldn't find one, my first thought was, and then my second thought was, oh. So I decided to start making a translation myself. And I'm about, the book's about 500 pages and I've done close to 100 pages now of it. Just translating it into English. And as far like I said, as far as I know, there's no English translation out there. And doing this, I feel like, is very similar in a lot of ways to playing music. With music, there's the composer, there's the listener, and in between, there's the performer. Now, sometimes the performer is also the composer. I know in a lot of pop music, those are almost always the same. But in classical music, especially, those two are almost never the same because, well, for obvious reasons. And of course, with books, with literature, there's, with novels, there's no equivalent to the performer if the author and the reader are in the same language, right? Because the author reads it and then the author writes it, and then the reader just takes it straight. But if it needs to be translated, then there's a translator. And I feel like a lot of the broad considerations that go into performing a piece and trying to be true to what the composer wanted, while bringing some of your own playing style to it. And I'm sure we could list a number of other aspects. All similarly go into translating a book where I'm trying to translate it accurately. I want to keep the story as it is, because if I change it, then it's not really the author's anymore, it's something else. And that's not mine either, because they didn't come up with the story. So I want to be accurate with it. But, there are all, at any turn in the process of translating, there are a number of word choices you can make, a number of ways you can word a sentence, structure a sentence, as to bring out, certain concepts. So I feel like using a thesaurus to come up with a more exciting word is kind of like using vibrato or an accent to bring out a note. They're doing the same type of thing. So, all this I've come to realize in the last month and a half as I've done this project. But it's the really good thing, the immediate reward of this project is that now I feel like I can fill my whole day. When I do half a day's worth of bassoon work and I just don't feel motivated anymore, well, I'll switch to the other thing that I was doing. And for now I'm doing this just for fun, but in the future, we'll see.
Yeah. Ben, it's interesting hearing about having your vision of, being an orchestral musician and then starting out at Arizona where it was a bit more entrepreneurial, supportive, and then now you're creating this fiction translation project and now going through COVID. Do you have any advice for young musicians starting out?
Related to the pandemic and what the future holds, I honestly don't know if I do have much advice. I feel like I don't know for sure what the music world is going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now. I mean, at some point, this pandemic will no longer be an issue. I feel confident enough to say that, even though I guess technically you could argue I don't know what I'm talking about. But a lot of people don't know what they're talking about when they talk about the pandemic, to be fair. Which is one of the things I find the most distressing is how many people will venture to say something without even at least saying, hey, I don't really know this. This is for what it's worth. So many people will just put it out as I know this because I read this study in this article, and therefore I'm an expert. Anyway, rant over. So I feel confident enough in saying at some point the pandemic won't be an issue affecting our lives this way anymore. I mean, whether the virus is still here is another question, but you know, but what the music world will look like, I mean, certainly the music world is in a bad place right now. I don't think there's any way, I mean, whatever upside there is right now, there's, it's definitely not in a good state. How it's going to bounce back, I feel like, because I don't know how to answer that question exactly, I would be hesitant to even put forth any advice for young musicians. I feel like the best thing I could say to a young musician watching right now is to do your own risk assessment and ask, how badly do you want a music career? Because if you really want it really, really badly, then I would say stick with it, do the best, find a way to survive until things bounce back up. But if it's something that in better conditions you'd be excited about, but now there's kind of, if you feel like it's tempered your excitement, then I would suggest at least listening to that voice inside your head that's saying, oh, is there something else out there? Kind of how the translation project, spoke to me. Not that I'm not committed to being a musician, but it's certainly shaken me a little bit in that sense. I'm not just starting out. So, I would not discourage anyone from going into music who really wants to. But at the same time, I would say if there's something else that is like calling to you, metaphorically speaking, I would say not a bad idea. I personally, when I was growing up, and I was, a student, I did not have a backup plan. I know there are lots of people who say, yeah, if you're going to go into music, you want to have a backup plan. And I get it. I'm not disagreeing. Although I say it almost can be better to not have a backup plan, to say, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to make it work somehow, and then it's like, oh, I got to find out why I'm not getting these gigs. I got to find out what's wrong with my playing and I got to fix it, and nothing motivates better than necessity, I think. But, so I didn't have a backup plan. But now is definitely not a bad time to have a backup plan if there's something out there. But if you want to be a musician, well, I would still say go for it.
Great advice, Ben. Who would you like to see interviewed next on the Let's Link project?
I'm glad I almost sort of thought about this question before you. Well, I mean, with the whole ASU connection here, you're going to have a session with Ashley Haney, who also went to school with us. Were you there at ASU at the same time that Ingrid and Hagan, I think? I don't know how you say her last name. Ingrid, you remember? You know who I'm talking about, though.
Yes, of course. Yes.
From New Zealand, in the same country.
Harmonia, yeah.
So, the whole ASU connection kind of jumped out at me, and
yes,
I would definitely, if you haven't reached out to her already, I would.
Yes. Wonderful. Yeah, would love to have Ingrid on. Cool, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing this interview. It's wonderful to get a glimpse into your life and career as a professional musician. I really appreciate your time, Ben.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out to me and making this happen.
For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for new interview videos with great bassoon guests shared every Thursday or Friday, depending on your time zone. On the Let's Link project, every guest interviewed here is hosting a free online discussion session via Zoom the following Sunday or Monday after the launch of this video that you can register for on the Music Link website. Please like, comment, and share any questions or feedback in the section below, and subscribe to this channel for new video notifications each week. The Music Link is a New Zealand-based online resource for people to share, learn, and connect. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.